There was a certain professor who lectured on his subject of expertise, but he was incarcerated, having been accused of practicing sedition. He was in jail for 10 years. But when he was released and stood in front of the lectern, in front of his students, he said, "As I was saying yesterday, we've been exploring the place it's said we arrive at when we no longer need to try, along with the question, why do we have to know who we are and what we do? And along with that, we could ask the question, what's time got to do with it?" There were 3 brothers who were lay Buddhists, and they were inspired to go on a pilgrimage to a very famous Buddhist shrine. And as they were traveling, they had to stay at an inn, but at that inn, the innkeeper had recently died, leaving a widow with 7 children. After a night's stay at the inn, 2 of the brothers went on their way. But the 3rd brother said, "I will remain and do what there is to do." After the requisite period of mourning, the widow said to the brother, "I have grown to love you and the care that you give. We could get married." But the brother said, "Let us revere your husband's memory and follow another period of mourning." So 7 years passed, and again the widow asked the brother, "Why don't we get married?" And the brother said, "Should we not revere the heritage that your husband has left with another period of mourning?" So another 7 years passed. By this time, the children had grown up and were able to take over the duties of the inn. So the brother took his little handkerchief that he had carried when he arrived and his staff, and resumed his travels towards the shrine. Then there's a story of the great Tibetan Lama, Potala Rinpoche, very much revered by all, but unusual in that, unlike the other great lamas who undertook their duties at the Potala Palace, fulfilling the rituals and so forth, Potala Rinpoche shunned all of that and wandered the steeps of the Tibetan mountains, dressed as an ordinary man, a worn jacket, fur-lined, made of yak leather. But it so happened that there was to be a great reception at the Potala Palace, where it was expected that Patrol Rinpoche would officiate, conducting a great initiation. People from everywhere would gather. So it required Patrol Rinpoche to travel the distance that was between where he was and the palace to undertake this duty. But on the road back to the palace, he encountered a woman with 3 children whose husband had recently been killed by a bear. And when they exchanged greetings and Patrol Rinpoche asked her where she was going, she said she was going to the headquarters, the capital, where the palace stood, because there she would be able to beg and provide for her children. So Patrol Rinpoche said, "So it happens, I too am going that way. Perhaps we can travel together." So, day after day, coming to villages, the widow would go and beg, and he also would go taking a begging bowl into the village to gather the rice or whatever was given to them. In the evenings they would share what they'd received, and afterwards Patrol Rinpoche would take several of the children underneath his fur-lined jacket to keep them warm, while the widow nursed the 3rd child. The travel took some while, and of course the widow had grown to love the presence of this gentle man, gentle, caring being, the quietude about him, the feeling of peace and the lack of grief that was with her when they were together. But as they came to the outskirts of the capital, it seemed that Patrol Rinpoche became a little agitated, and the widow wondered about this. But then Patrol Rinpoche said to the widow, "Here we must go our own way, because there is a tendency for people to gossip." She did not know or understand what it was that he was meaning, but she could do nothing but do as was said. She went into the capital to go about begging for her children's food, and Patrol Rinpoche went to the Potala Palace, where preparations were being made for the great initiation ceremony. It was very strange, because when Patrol Rinpoche spoke to the monks who were there making the preparations, quite unusual for him, he said to the monks, "Whatever gifts are given to me, put them aside, because I'm expecting a special guest." Now, Patrol Rinpoche had never done this before. He had always rejected all the gifts that were given to him. So the monks scratched their head about this, but did what he said. Now the day of the great ceremony came about, and Patrol Rinpoche sat with his conical hat and his robes, giving out the benediction, the initiations, and speaking of the wisdom that had brought these rituals about. The widow had come to attend, of course, and she sat at the back fringes of the crowd until it was time for each person to come up, to bow and place around the neck of the Rinpoche the white silk scarf that was the honor that was conferred. When it was time for the widow to come forth, to her very great shock and surprise, there was her travel companion of these last days. She fell down on her knees, apologizing for not recognizing him, apologizing for asking him to marry her. He just smiled benevolently and called over the monks to tell them, "This is my special gift, my special guest. Please give to her all the gifts that have been given to me to enable her to take care of her children henceforth." Have you had the experience, as you no doubt have, of meeting someone you hadn't seen for some long while, maybe years, and embracing them and taking up exactly where you left off, as though there had been no time in between? So, the question that can be asked of us, knowing that without doubt each of us have had this experience in one way or another, which we could call timelessness. So the question that's posed to us relative to our inquiries is, does timelessness fit into time, or time fit into timelessness? Looking at the place where we now find ourselves, with an absence of the need to try, what is the relationship now between time and timelessness? Does timelessness fit into time, or time fit into timelessness? What's your experience now?